Well, this is the day the Lord has made, and we're here to rejoice and be glad in it. I want to welcome you to the Hope TV and certainly thank you for tuning in to our network on today. It is my prayer, blessed, and that you're encouraged and you're empowered by our opportunity to come and share with you on the Hope TV. I want to thank you that you've been able to help us to spread positive content all over the world. We started our first pandemic broadcast on March 19th, pastoring through a pandemic series, March 19th. And from that day up into this one, we're now offering 24 programs a week on the Hope TV. And certainly it means the world to us. Your support has been overwhelming. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for your kind words of support and your suggestions. We now have had our programs viewed by over 6 million views in a little over 30 days. And so it says a whole lot to us that means a lot to us that you're supporting our team and our staff. We're trying to bring holistic content that will touch people from a perspective that's spiritual, that's emotional, even physical. We want to undergird all of our programming with an emphasis on faith, family, fitness, finances, our fellowships, and even interject some fun along the way. So I appreciate you for the opportunity just to come and serve, and thank you for being a part of our family. And if you are watching through a medium whereby you can drop us a line or a comment or send the link to someone else or share the link, please do so right now. I also want to ask that you would subscribe to our social media platforms. We have the House of Hope Atlanta YouTube platform, and if you subscribe to that channel, you will receive notifications as to when new content is uploaded. And you can also follow us on the House of Hope Atlanta on Facebook, HOHATL on Instagram and Twitter. And also you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Please continue to support us. Send a link, subscribe, like it, share, or leave a comment. And also while you're watching, let us know the city and state or the country from which you've. It's very important for us to know our demographics because we want to provide you with content that's empowering, that's engaging, that can help transform us. Because certainly in these difficult times, we all need some positive content. And our aim here is to provide you with the daily dose of hope. And I want you to know that even in difficult times, whether it be epidemic or pandemic, we still serve a great God. And I want you to be encouraged to have a sound mind, that we can be whole and healthy spiritually, emotionally, and physically, because God is good and some great things are happening. So this is happening with us, and we're going to be out all right. We're going to get out of this. God's going to bring us through this. I'm telling you, we will make it out all right. Believe that by faith. I'm so excited today because this is our one-on-one segment, and it's very exciting when we get an opportunity to interview some people who have just distinguished themselves in their careers, whether it be through entertainment, athletics, the law, politics, film, music, comedy. We've just been able to interview a plethora of people, from professional athletes to comedians to filmmakers, just a host of people to bring positive content to kind of help us be inspired to pursue our dreams and to think on a different level. So I want to thank you for thinking with us in this one-on-one platform and broadcast. Today, I'm excited to introduce a young lady I met many years ago. She's a native of Sumter, South Carolina, and she's a graduate of Spelman College, greatest institutions in the world. So she's a Spelman sister, and I'm thankful to God that God has taken her from Sumter, South Carolina, to literally see the entire world. And she's been blessed to travel the world doing some incredible things. And she's here. She's back with us. She's taught. She's a tenured professor at Harvard University, and she's just recently moved back to Atlanta to be a part of the faculty at Emory University. And so we are beyond blessed to have her here with us today for one-on-one on the Hope TV. Let me welcome Dr. Marla Fredericks to our show today. Dr. Fredericks, how are you?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm great. I'm great. It's such a privilege and honor to be with you today.
Glad to have you with us. You know, you are an incredible writer, incredible thinker. Um, I want to hear about your journey because you were the first person I met who was a cultural anthropologist,
Yes.
and it was so deep. You sent me to. It was so deep and so heavy, it made me start reading some more. So just tell us, how did you get from Sumter back to Atlanta? I want to hear the whole journey.
The whole journey. So, of course, I grew up in Sumter. Um, the daughter of two people. I want to tell my parents' story, a little bit of their story to talk about who I am, because it's kind of hard to talk about who I am without talking about them. So both of my parents had the opportunity to go to college. My mom in Louisiana at Southern University, and my dad in South Carolina at Morris College. And my mother was raised by her grandparents. So my great grandparents had 13 children, were able to send at least 6 of them to college, to Southern and Grambling. And my dad grew up sharecropping, and one day was walking home from school when he was about to graduate from high school, and a minister said, well, what you gonna do with it once you graduate? And he said, I'm not sure. He said, I'd love to go to college, but I don't have any money. And so he said, well, you don't always have to have money to go to college. He said, I'm going to call a friend of mine who's the president of Morris College in Sumter, and I'm going to talk to him about getting you an education. So he called up Dr. O.R. Rubin, and Dr. O.R. Rubin said, when the minister called, you started celebrating my dad, telling him what a great person he was. And my dad said he was in the room. He was like, who is this kid he's talking about? But Dr. Rubin made room for him at Morris and allowed him to serve as his driver for 4 years in order to pay for college. And so once he graduated from college, Dr. Rubin sent him to Atlanta University to get an MBA, and told him, once you get your MBA, I want you to come back here and serve as business manager at Morris. And so my dad came back to Morris and served as business manager. He met my mom at AU because she went from Southern to AU, and they married and raised us in Sumter. But I tell that story to just talk about the power of one person to change the trajectory of a whole family's life. That Dr.
Mm.
Bush was interested in my father, what he was going to do after college, called Dr. Rubin. Dr. Rubin made room for him at a school and allowed him to drive for him to pay off college. So, when you influence one person's life, it's not just that person, it's that family, and then for generations. So I honor Dr. Rubin and Mrs. Rubin for what they did, and my great grandparents for what they did. And so my parents were always insistent that I was going to college. That was a foregone conclusion. And so when I got to my senior year, my dad said, I've been accepted to University of South Carolina with a scholarship and to Spelman College. And my dad said, wherever you go, you'll be fine. And my mom said, well, you need an HBCU experience. I believe you need an HBCU. So that was my deciding factor in coming to Spelman. And I'm so glad I listened to my mom, because it really did shape who I became as a Black woman. It was just phenomenal to be in the context of all of these young women from so many various backgrounds who were all smart and ambitious and thoughtful. And so I was in that context for 4 years. I was mentored by a woman named Gloria Wade Gales, who was my English professor. And one day I told her my junior year, I said, I want to go to law school. She's like, we have enough lawyers, Marla. We need some people who are going to be a part of the pipeline of educating young Black women like you. And so I decided that I would consider this program to prepare minorities for academic careers. I didn't know what a PhD was. I had no idea what anthropology was at the time. And so I started this program my junior year. Senior year, I took the one course that Dr. Janetta Cole taught in cultural anthropology. She was the president of the college at that time, but she taught one course on Wednesday nights, an anthropology course. And it just changed my life, that you could have an opportunity to study so many various people groups and understand how they love and how they fellowship and how they think about history. I mean, it was just fascinating. And so I decided I wanted to go on and earn a PhD in cultural anthropology. That was my intro. And so, with the support of Dr. Gales and Dr. Cole, I applied to Duke. I'd done the summer internship program at Duke with Dr. Carla Holloway there. And so then I went on to cultural anthropology, spent 6 years there, was mentored by Dr. Holloway, Lee Baker, Charlie Peel. I mean, they were just incredible faculty members who took an interest in me and cared about my development and helped me to soar. And so once I finished Duke, I applied for a postdoc. I was a postdoc at Princeton at the Center for the Study of Religion. I'd gone to Duke to study religion, women in religion. That was my title. I was interested in studying women in the Nation of Islam, and changed my interest. I was interested in women in Islam because my senior year at Spelman, one of my close friends was working towards her ex in the Nation of Islam. And I was just fascinated by kind of her discipline and her commitment to the nation, and just want to know what that was about. And we would have these debates at dinner time about whether Christianity was a white man's religion. I mean, it was just a dynamic time. I mean, Spike Lee had just come out with his movie on Malcolm X. I mean, Farrakhan was still doing Savior. It was just a lot. And so I wanted to study that context, but decided to study women in the church when I went to graduate school because I felt that was a more comfortable place for me to be a kind of critical observer, and for me to make an impact. And so wrote my dissertation on Black women and their faith and activism in Eastern North Carolina, in one of the poorest counties in North Carolina, in Halifax County. And then went on to do a postdoc so that I could work on that research and turn it into a book. So I did a postdoc at Princeton for a year, and then taught at Cincinnati for a year, University of Cincinnati, and then came back to Atlanta at the ITC in the Office of Black Women in Church and Society to complete the book. So I was working there with Dr. Jacqueline Grant, and that was an incredible year for me to just hone in on my research topic. But while I was finishing that book, I got to my research, and I was thinking about these women in this poor community, how they were responding to the economic pressures of being in Halifax County. Halifax still has one of the highest number of outhouses of any county in the state, and just thinking about those economic pressures. But one of the things that was new at the time that I was doing my research was 24-hour religious broadcasting. So as I was finishing up, I was thinking, now, this should have been my subject. This should have been my study. And I said, the next book I want to do on televangelism. And so when I finished the 2 postdocs, I had an opportunity, and this was, I believe, the Lord's doing. Doors opened up for me to go to teach at Harvard, because I had it's a long, meandering story, but I had 2 people that I worked with, both unbeknownst to them, telling me, Marla, you need to apply to this job. And so I ended up applying to the job, and started there in 2003 as an assistant professor, and stayed there for 16 years, worked my way up the ranks from assistant to associate to full professor. Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, many of you may know him by his full name, used to say, Marla, you're the first Black woman to earn tenure through the ranks at Harvard. And, there are other Black women tenured there, but brought in as full professors. And so it was quite a place to build one's career and to come of age as a scholar in that dynamic context. So spent 16 years there, and got married about 5 years ago to a wonderful man in Durham, North Carolina, whom I met when I was in graduate school. And so we commuted. I commuted back and forth from Durham to Boston for 5 years, and we talked about the possibility of living under the same roof. It was doable as an academic. There are many academics who commute in relationships. And then this opportunity at Emory opened up. I received an email from the chair of the search committee about would I be interested in the Asa Griggs Candler professorship. And I thought, back to Atlanta? Like, what would that look like? And so decided to pursue it. Had incredible conversations with the dean, Jan Love, and with the provost at the time, Dwight McBride. And they were building such a dynamic program there. And I have saying they're certainly not afraid of Black faculty in the divinity school at Candler, in a way that, you know, they have a mass. I know when they were doing my search, they were also interviewing two other potential faculty members, African American faculty members. So um, not to say that many, you know, schools don't have work to do, but it was just an exciting time. And I think Dwight McBride had a vision for Emory being a kind of central place for the study of Black life in the South. Like, can we build a university, a program, a set of programs across the university that are interested in the concerns of Black people? And so that attracted me. And then the opportunity to influence people in the church. Like, I had not taught in a divinity school before. I've been at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. I've had divinity students cross-register into my courses, but I had not taught at a divinity school. And so that too, I felt, is a calling to help influence the next generation of church leaders and community leaders. So I consider it a complete honor and privilege to be back in Atlanta and at Emory and Candler. So.
That's just what an amazing journey. I remember when you were dating and when you were getting ready to get married and trying to figure it out. I mean, because at one
Yes.
point there was a battle between the University of Chicago and Harvard, and that was prior to you getting married.
No,
And
Northwestern, yeah.
your husband is an attorney, so he's practicing
Yes.
law there in North Carolina. So you're
Yes.
teaching in he's practicing law in North Carolina, and now you both settle here on Atlanta, and it's comfortable.
We, it is comfortable. He is extending a branch of the Banks law firm. It's one of the largest Black-owned law firms in the Southeast, and he's expanding a branch here in Atlanta.
You talk about, this is your first time being in a divinity school, but it's interesting that the Between Sundays book. Can you talk about what gave impetus for you to write that book?
Wow. You know, I kept thinking, you know, there have been so much research on various aspects of the church, as if religion took place only in the context of the church, in the four walls. And the women that I knew were always kind of engaged beyond Sunday service. And so I decided I wanted to spend a year doing research with women in Halifax County. I was part of a larger program looking at economic restructuring across North Carolina and how various communities were responding to it. And in Halifax County, there was a threat of a hog farm, and were people going to organize against these large industrial-sized hog farms coming into Halifax County? And a group of Black senior citizens in an organization called the Concerned Citizens of Tillery were one of the organizing groups who forced the state to establish the first moratorium on hog farming, industrialized hog farming in their community, because we know environmental justice issues are real and they often affect Black communities and the poorer your community is, the more susceptible you are to various forms of environmental degradation. And so this group of senior citizens, older Black women and older Black men, organized, and I was just fascinated. They would come together on Tuesdays, and it would be like a church service. They'd have a minister come in, they'd have some people sing, and then they'd open up with debates about what's going on in our community and how can we change it. And when do we need to go to the state to protest and organize? And these people were in there plus 65, plus 70, plus 80, plus 90. Mother Susie Weathersby was 100 years old, would be out there protesting. So I was fascinated by how their faith commitments informed the way they engaged their community. And so I spent time interviewing these senior women in the community and other, stakeholders in the community. But the Between Sundays itself revolves around their story of how they were trying to change their community, how faith was informing their own personal lives around issues of finances, around issues of sexuality. So it tries to cover this whole span of time from Monday to Saturday, looking at how faith influences one's life.
It's so amazing you talked about in that book about the protests and having a justice and a love ethic, and how what you wrote years ago is so apropos now, not just in terms of environmental degradation, but even in terms of what's
Absolutely.
happening now, even with the coronavirus and the
Absolutely.
injustices and the marginalization. What has been your thought? We haven't really had an opportunity to talk about it. You're now a resident, of Georgia, and so my governor is now your governor.
Hmm.
What- what's your thought process? I mean, in terms of that, you see the parallels between what you wrote in that book and maybe some tenets we can utilize now to help us navigate through these times.
Absolutely. And Stacey Abrams is my Spelman sister, right? The one who could
Indeed,
have been governor. Right.
should have been.
So, you know, should have been, exactly. What I would say is it's not time for the church to retreat from social and political issues that affect the Black community, but it's time to get engaged. And we actually have to figure out what that's going to look like in an age of a virus that has relegated most of us to our homes. How do we organize? How do we, put pressure on state and local officials, maintain pressure to do what's right for poor communities, right? Wealthy communities will always be taken care of, but the church's call is to think about the least of these, right? God says, if you've done it to the least of these, then you've done it to me. And so the church's concern should always be on the least of these. And so we have to remain vigilant and figure out ways to help benefit communities that would otherwise be overlooked and marginalized.
It's funny that you talked about that in the book, about the elderly population. One of my colleagues, Terrell Whitley, who I interviewed here 2 weeks ago, he works in filmmaking, and we've been having some very serious conversations. He and his schoolmates, he's an HBCU grad as well, went to Florida A&M. He and my good friend, member of our church, Rob Hardy, and Will Packer, they all came up together, they pledged at the same time. And we've been talking a lot about the social injustices and trying to have a voice of liberation to really speak truth to power to the government in these times. And when Terrell called me a couple of weeks ago, he called me really kind of disheveled, kind of bothered, because he'd had a conversation with his dad. And his dad was asking the question, where are the young leaders? Where are the church leaders? Where are the faith leaders? I'm not hearing anybody that's really addressing these issues in terms of government and decisions to reopen, the ramifications that and the consequences of how it's going to affect, our communities and urban communities and poor communities, and how we, suffer disproportionately as African Americans from the virus and those who are immunocompromised. So his dad was just real, and the reality of it, his dad, is 70 plus, but yet still had a voice for wanting there to be some social change and social movement. But it seems
Yeah.
it's so difficult to galvanize us amongst faith leaders, those of who are younger, because we don't have that same sense of community that you described
Yeah.
in that book. And I just think that's so apropos. You know, was that something that was that a culture in that county? It was developed. I'm trying to figure out how can we pick those principles up so they can be portable and transferable, because we're lacking those principles now.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes when people of faith get involved, they get involved in organizations beyond the church. Like they don't necessarily see the church as a political galvanizing organization, particularly because of some of the laws and rules that have governed that. And so they may get involved in other kinds of social change movement. That doesn't mean the church is not involved. It just means that the church is not within the context of that building. And so that's what the Concerned Citizens of Tillery is. It's a group of people, I would say at the time, 95% of them who had a serious Christian commitment. There was one who was very clear. He didn't give much two hoots about the church and anybody else. You know, as older people can sometimes be rather ornery and clear about their commitment.
Indeed.
But in that context, they were all very clear that something had to be done, and they were willing to organize, and they saw a connection. This is what was most, I guess, important, in that they saw a connection between their everyday lives and the decisions that were being made at City Hall, right? Some people don't necessarily see that connection between what's happening in my everyday life and what people, you know, down the street or downtown or are voting on every week, you know. And I think that the ability to help people make that connection is where the church can be most influential. Like, you can see, you know, do I have paved roads? Is something going to be built in my community that's going to affect my community? My dad laments all the time. He wants more young people to get on these zoning boards to decide, you know, whether businesses can go here or there. And sometimes he talks about having to advocate for small Black businesses when a larger zoning board isn't necessarily interested in that small Black business. So we have to be in many different places in order to affect change.
You know, it's amazing how the church has been such an important part of your journey, and how your writing has informed, you know, faith communities. And there's been such a gap, in my opinion, and sometimes a disdain between the academic community and the ecclesial communities. Sometimes it's hard to have a common thread. You know, sometimes the ecclesial community, there's a lot of intimidation in terms of those of the academy. Those of the academy, sometimes there's a sense of elitism and disconnect because those people in the, you know, ecclesial communities, they don't get it. And so sometimes when people write in the academy to talk about the church, it's hard to write about and bring transformation to something that you're not a part of.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I love
Yes.
about your work and what you're doing. You're not just writing from an academic, from the ivory tower perspective, but that your writing is able to undergird what's happening in a public theological way, not just for those who in, you know, in institutions of higher learning. And was that your intention to do that?
You know what? I just realized that that's who I am. You know, that's who I've always been. I was there's a push in sometimes in anthropology to be a distant observer, right? An objective distant observer, unconnected to your subject of study. And then there was a kind of revision work in the 60s and 70s that kind of pushed against that, because as more Black and brown people came into the field, the subject of study was always poor Black and brown people, whether they were in Africa or something. You had white anthropologists going to study the other. But when you have Black and brown people now studying their own community, there has to be a reckoning of that, right? And so as a person of faith, I felt like that was another part of my identity that needed to at least be acknowledged in my work. You know, I grew up Baptist in South Carolina, and when I was in Boston for 16 years, I was a faithful member of a AME church, Sunday school teacher, director of Christian education. You know, I'm all in it. And but all of that has been enriching, I felt, to my work. It's all helped me to think even more critically about the issues that I'm wrestling with and the issues that I see people wrestling with in the pews.
You know, I remember before you got married, and back in 2012, 2013, you were doing traveling, preparing to write another book on televangelism, and you came to our church
Yes.
and spent some time there. I think you were on sabbatical doing some tenure. I think you went down to the Caribbean, traveled a few other
Yep.
places. in preparation to write that book. Um, Tell us about it. Tell us about that book. You kind of looked at televangelism, and I want to hear about that because I think it's foundational for where we are now as a nation
Yeah.
and as a world. And that's why we've been trying to get you on here for the past couple of weeks, because it's eerie to think about what you were writing in 2012,
Hmm.
2013, and the book was published in 2016, and where we are
Yeah.
right now in 2020. It's really prophetic and almost frightening, to say the least. So talk a little
Yeah.
bit about it.
Yeah, when I started this work, I told you when I did between Sundays, I was interviewing these women, and they were talking about all this 24 this televangelism they were watching. And this is in like 1999, 2000. So 24-hour broadcast, religious broadcasting, television broadcasting, it just come to Halifax County. And I knew that the next book needed to be on religious broadcasting because it was so important to how the women were understanding themselves as people of faith. And so when I decided to do colored television, I wanted to understand what impact are televangelists having not only in the United States, but outside of the United States. So one of the things that has been phenomenal to watch is the realization that somebody like T.D. Jakes, for example, isn't just popular in the US, but when you go to Jamaica, if you go into a Christian bookstore in Jamaica, his books are all over the shelves. When I went to South Africa, his books are all over the shelves. The same with Joyce Meyer and Paula White. And so what impact and why are American televangelists having this kind of global influence? And so that was the impetus for the research. And so as I began to do the work, I had an opportunity to interview two kind of, I guess, early architects of religious broadcasting, Reverend Frederick Eicheren Carter, and Bishop Carlton Pearson. And those interviews were so telling. It was not only about how televangelism was influencing this kind of broader community, but how it was actually changing the church and the church culture. Um, Reverend Ike talked about, he was a prosperity preacher. He's a prosperity preacher from day one. And, it's one thing, we had radio broadcasting for so long, and then we went to television. He said, and when, he was the first nationally syndicated African-American televangelist. And he said, and that's visual, right? So you got to look good, right? You got to look like money. So it meant that the church then had to do something different to appeal to this larger audience, right? Because television is very visual, right? It's not just audio. You can say what you want on audio, look how you want on audio. So we talk about this internet thing, right? You got to look good from your waist up, right? Who cares what you got sweatpants on from your waist down? But with television, he was just talking about the impact of this visuality on these communities. And then for Carlton Pearson, to hear his story, his kind of rise at the peak of televangelism, and then the decline, that his church went into foreclosure after he switched theologies. But one of the things he said that at his height, the thing about televangelism is it demands a lot of money. You have to be able, as he said, it's like a wild animal park. You have to be able to feed the thing, and it wants to be fed every month, right? So if you're on for 30 minutes a week, depending on your time slot, that could cost you up to $20,000 for 30 minutes of airtime. If you're on 4 times a month, once a week, that's $80,000. If you're on multiple stations, that's that times that. And so if you were going to be a major televangelist, you had to be, according to Carlton Pearson and Reverend Knight, you had to be a money raiser, right? You had to be able to raise that money. And so what was fascinating to me was not only how televangelism was changing the church, the increase in emphasis on a kind of prosperity gospel, like God has called you to, sow seeds into my ministry so that you would be blessed. And these appeals, kind of constant appeals to pay for airtime. It was not just that, but it was also thinking about, well, how is this affecting the day-to-day, the everyday people? And so as I started doing the research, um, things were beginning to change, right? So you have this huge um, panoply of major televangelists. There's, T.D. Jakes, Joyce Myers, who is, as someone said, the elephant in the room that nobody really talks about because they're always talking about the men. But Joyce Myers is a force to be reckoned with in the world of televangelism. Paula White was popular at the time, and Juanita Bynum was popular at the time. And I'll make a side note here and go back to my original point. But one of the things I noticed about the rise of female televangelists I talk about in the book was the ways in which their testimonies of sexual redemption were so central. I argued to like their legitimacy, the way people gave them legitimacy and their rise to success, because they struck a chord with so many women, not only in the United States, but around the world. And I argue that the more economically vulnerable women are, the more sexually vulnerable they are. And so when I'm interviewing women in Jamaica who had, one woman I interviewed had been raped 3 different times, just because of kind of community, the poverty of the community, the laxness of the criminal justice system as it relates to rapists. But she loved Juanita Bynum because she said, if I listen to her, if she can go through what she went through and be who she is, then I see myself in her. She could see herself in Joyce Myers. There's a way of identifying with these women figures. But the challenge of televangelism, again, was the cost, right? It's so astronomically expensive. It immediately almost alters your theology because you have to raise money, right? You may be inclined to want to raise a lot of money anyway, but if you're gonna be on television, you better be able to raise money. And so what drew me to even thinking about House of Hope was that you had been on television and you came off of television for that very reason. And you guys were on kind of the forefront of this internet move. Your media head was creating space for you on platforms on early stages of Facebook and Instagram, and showing me these charts of your likes on Facebook vis-a-vis those of other people who were just as who were even more well known in the televangelist space. But your ministry was kind of growing at the same time, but not having to deal with the exorbitant cost of television. And so what the internet does is it has this democratizing effect, right? Anybody can be on the internet, and it may cost some in production, but it's a fraction of what it would cost if you were on television. And so spending time at the House of Hope was just really influential in thinking about this church thing on the internet is going somewhere, and this church is somehow going to be in the forefront of that work, because you were then, and clearly, you guys are now.
Here's what's amazing. You published a book in 2016, and it kind of reminds me of this whole thing with blockbusters versus, Netflix. Years ago, the CEO of Netflix goes to Blockbusters and says, "Hey guys, I'm gonna give you an opportunity. I'm gonna either buy you out or I'm gonna take you out. The choice is
Right.
yours." And Blockbuster decides get out of here, keep it moving. And you look now, and I think they said there's 1 Blockbusters in the whole
Wow.
country, up in Iowa somewhere. And so the guy
Wow.
actually did exactly what he said. You don't see Blockbusters,
Yeah.
but you do see Netflix everywhere. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening, how your book was so prophetic, is that who would have ever imagined, as you talk about digital media and technology in 2016, and the importance of that, and how it's going to be the new wave, it's going to be the new Netflix, cable televisions, the cost, and people coming down because people not, even in terms of partnership and how people once supported it and mailing it, and the millennials are not doing it. They don't believe in televangelism to the extent that boomers and
Right.
others have done. And so here we are now, 4 years later, and the coronavirus has literally made everybody embrace the internet. What are
Yes.
your thoughts on media and TV going forward? You know, I mean, what have your studies shown? Because I'm trying to get some insight to other leaders who are watching who's still having a hard time embracing technology. And the Washington
Hmm.
Post suggests those who don't, 30% of them will not make it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think we're all going to have to get more comfortable with being online, and taking our ministries online. And I understand much of the hesitancy, right? So I'm old enough to remember when churches were just starting to put bookstores in their churches, right? And there were critiques of that because it was like we're bringing the money changers into the house of the Lord, right? You can't have money changers in the house. You can give away tapes free, but you can't charge for them, right? So I remember that. I remember the debates when people wanted to put up a screen, a television screen in the church. And we talked about this early. Like you are defaming the sanctuary. And so even as we're growing, we have to remember to be adaptive to the technologies of the community. Otherwise, we will go the way of the blockbusters. But one of the, and I think part of it is a challenge. You want to do ministry where you understand that ministry is about caring for people. It's about being on the ground. People feel like, this digital space is not tangible. So how can I care for the poor? How can I, meet the needs of the sick, sit with those who are grieving? Those are real concerns. And we have to figure out, how do we integrate technology into that work, right? We can't leave it aside, but we can't dismiss that work because that is the work of the church. But how do we integrate media into doing more of that work? The way people are dying with COVID is heartbreaking, right? They're alone in hospitals. But one of the things that nurses and doctors have been able to do is allow people even in their last hours to FaceTime with their family members. And so the digital space can become a sacred space. I mean, it's a sacred ministry to allow somebody to sit with somebody who's actually dying. And so the church can't just look at uh, the internet as, the secular space, and this is the sacred space. There's no such thing. We have to figure out, how do we integrate this medium into the work that we are called to do?
This is absolutely amazing. I really, your work is absolutely necessary, and I really want to find a way to, you know, to practically, present that book. I mean, because it's so apropos for this time. I hope you're gonna come back and do something,
Mm.
because we need a whole we need a whole TV show just to go chapter by chapter. Yeah, I mean, to help us to understand the
Thank you.
history, where do we go awry? Because I think even in that rise of
Yeah.
prosperity gospel, as you talked about earlier, I think it's in that context that we lost a sense of community. When you
And
notice
we
church
lost a
before
lot
the
of
rise
young
of
people.
televangelism, that is the truth. That is the truth. And I was talking to
Yeah.
Bernice King on this past Monday. We had a second COVID-19 testing at the church, and we partnered with the Georgia Department of Health, the County Department of Health, Chick-fil-A, and our church to test, give free testing to people in the community. And she came by on Monday, and we were talking, and she was asking questions about local clergy and why we just couldn't galvanize our efforts. And she said to me, this would have never happened in my father's day. She said, my father was able to champion
Mm.
people around the cause, great minds, great leaders who didn't have any agenda or any ego. They came together. And she said to me that she thought that this unhealthy fixation on prosperity gospel, which we really saw originate and develop in a full sense and evolve as a result of televangelism, and it's not a
Yep.
sustainable model. And I just think that maybe what's happening now, maybe through COVID, maybe through what you're sharing, that it can help to bring us back to a sense of community. That's my prayer, because I see a
Mm.
common thread through both those books. How do we get back to community from here? And maybe COVID-19 is going to do that.
Wow. That would be tremendous. That would be tremendous. One of the things people hold a concern about in scholarly circles is this idea of consumer religion, right? It goes with prosperity. Like
Yep.
people go to church to just be entertained. They go to hear a great sermon. They go to hear great choir. But now that's not the centerpiece, right? We've got to figure out what that looks like to connect to people who can't come together to just be entertained by a great message or moved by a great message, because the church is about having legs and feet on the ground, and we've got to figure out how to do that and connect with people, show people that we care, even when we can't come together in this one space. And media could be a space for that. When you were talking about the Hope Television and all of the different ministries and the way young people are participating and the seniors are participating. I mean, we have to be creative in how we bring people together. And I think what you guys are doing is some tremendous part of that churches can learn from. But I know that there are other churches out there who are equally engaged in active ministry, trying to get young people back involved in the church, like we talked about earlier, through media. Young people are interested in technologies, even if the seniors aren't, and they can help them with that. So it's
Well, I'm hoping, when I look at your vast experiences, particularly since you're back in Atlanta, I'm curious about how we can do a hybrid approach. You were, over the Christian Education Department at your church in Boston. And I'm curious about picking your brain and getting you in your time when you're not at Emory to help us. I want to figure out a model how we can fully integrate Christian education and discipleship in with media, because I think that template. I mean, we've had worship. As you said earlier, we perfected in the African American church preaching and the production and the pageantry and the lights and all that,
yeah,
all the accoutrements. But now,
yeah,
how do we really incorporate learning, education, discipleship, and ministry into the digital space? So I'm curious.
yeah.
I think that's some opportunity that's why I'm so curious about the book and how we can do it. So I look forward to you helping me figure that out here at the House of Hope.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for sharing today. And family, if you have not read these books by this absolute genius who's just not just a great thinker and a scholar, but she's an amazing woman. She's an incredible wife, just an incredible thought leader, and just a great
Thank
person,
you.
just a wonderful human being. I appreciate you and admire you so much. And then, by the way, and one of your Spelman sisters, one of your best friends, Lisa Herring, who I met you through
Yes.
years ago, you're back at Emory. I mean, who leaves Harvard after 16 years? I mean, but you're back to Atlanta, the AUC grad, and now Lisa's coming back to AUC to be the superintendent of schools for the Atlanta public school system.
Yes.
How in the world did that happen? Is that amazing?
Look at God. She and we are tickled beyond belief. We are tickled beyond belief. We are
It's
excited.
exciting. Yeah, she's going to do our town hall for us next week, so I'm excited about that. Fam, you've been listening and to just a bona fide, incredible human being, thinker that we're so happy to have back here with us in Atlanta, Emory University County School of Theology, Dr. Marla Frederick. If you've never read her literature, we're going to put those books back up again while you're out for the have some time off. Let me encourage you to get it. Colored Television, American Religion Gone Global. You got to get that. I mean, published in 2016. It's heavy. It's heavy and it's apropos. I think it gives some context to pastors who want to figure out the next wave. She was prophetic in the book. And of course, the first one I read was Between Sundays, Black Women and the Everyday Struggles of Faith by Marla F. Frederick. You got to get it. She is back in the ATL. She's at Emory University, and she's going to be helping us at the House of Hope figure out how to merge Christian education and discipleship into the digital space. And give your husband my regards. I appreciate you. Thanks for sharing with us, and continue to
Will
be who you
do.
are, because you're inspiring so many people around the world. Thank you for sharing.
Wow. Thank you. I so appreciate it. So appreciate it. And appreciate you.
Outstanding. Hey, fam, you've been watching One on One, and I hope you've been blessed and inspired. Go get those books, read them. You're going to be blessed by it. Even in difficult times, please remember God is not intimidated. God is not slack concerning those divine promises. We're going to get through this. All the promises of God are yea and amen. It's tough now, but there's always a word from God. Be encouraged and always remember this. If you be good to God, God will be good to you. You've been watching One on One on the Hope TV. God bless you. Peace.